everybody. I'm Marina Lostetter. Welcome to the first in my reading series where I read to you parts of my currently published and upcoming work. Today I have for you Noumenon, which was my debut novel back in 2017. It's science fiction space opera, an epic adventure of science and discovery. I'm going to read to you the back blurb to give you a little bit of context for the parts I'm going to be reading. And then I'm going to pick a section from the middle of the book to introduce you to this world and these characters. Astrophysicist Reggie Strafer has an idea. He's discovered an anomalous star that appears to defy the laws of physics and proposes the creation of a deep space mission to find out whether the star is a weird natural phenomenon or something more alien. The journey will take eons. In order to maintain the genetic talent of the original crew, humankind's greatest ambition, to explore the furthest reaches of the galaxy, is undertaken by clones. But a clone is not a perfect copy, and each new generation has its own quirks, desires, and neuroses. As the centuries fly by, the society living aboard the 9 ships changes and evolves, but their mission remains the same: to reach Reggie's mysterious star and explore its origins and its implications. Rail hated dirt with a strange, unnatural passion. Dust, silt. Didn't matter if he had a spacesuit between him and the filth, it was there, clinging. The miners' suits glowed bright white even in the depths of the pit, until they got dirty. Gray and brown and black and flecks of red iron, chips of minerals, chunks of silica, bits of ice. He hated it all, and he hated it hard. So hard, it let him forget about other things, like radiation exposure, falling rocks, misplaced blasts. Today, it let him forget about broken necks and limp feet and mirrored sunglasses. Because the dirt you could wash off at the end of the day. It was something he hated that he could get rid of. The pit was little more than a man-made hole in a planemo. Besides the mines, it contained the prisoners' barracks, latrines, kitchens, infirmary, and solitary. Rail, like the rest of the prisoners, had only a rudimentary understanding of what he worked for. He knew his primary purpose, of course. He dug for iron, which would be turned into metal alloys and then into a ship. But what was the ship for? The prisoners lived in the pit while a convoy orbited several 100,000 kilometers out. Okay, but what did the convoy do and where had it come from? The prisoners were all criminals, but not a one knew what his or her crime had been. Just that it was a crime in their genes, not one that had acted themselves. They'd endangered the lives of everyone in that convoy, but no one would tell them how or why. Mining was their penance. And time and again, the master warden and sub-wardens told them to be grateful. Without the mines, they never would have been birthed. Their traitorous genes would have stayed on lockdown, never to be cloned again. Rail lived because of the mine, but grateful wasn't the term he'd use. When the sub-warden's shock baton stayed holstered, he was grateful. But living in general, that left him more baffled than anything. Only a day had passed since the hanging. One of the dead men had been on his dig team, but had bunked in a different cell block, so Rail hadn't known him well. Still, the team worked in silence. Their comms stayed on, but no one spoke. The shaft they worked ran deep into the planemo, kilometers down. An antiquated ventilation system pumped the mine full of dust-laden, irradiated air, always heavy in carbon dioxide. The suit and helmets drew it in, supposedly scrubbing the gas, making it fit for human consumption, but Rail had his doubts as to how well the old spacesuits had been retrofitted. White flashes produced by the laser drills as they bore through the rock stung Rail's eyes. Even with the air choked full of dust and smog and debris, the brightness sliced through. The hand-operated drills weighed over 40 kilograms apiece, and Rail, whose nickname had not been given in jest, could barely maintain his hold. With dozens of workers blasting away in the confines only meters apart, the tunnel's temperature soared in excess of 40 degrees Celsius. The high temp made a dangerous job deadly. This deep, frozen rock and ice pockets lay in wait. If suddenly superheated by a laser, they could take down an entire shaft and everyone inside. Thermal stress fractures, pressurized cave-ins, gas explosions, low gravity, and 1,000 other problematic accidents typically resulted in dozens of deaths each year. Illnesses, cancers, and malnutrition killed dozens more. Then there were the suicides, and the crimes, and the punishments. Yeah, grateful wasn't the word he'd use. Alright, so this is the two-part reading. I'm going to read to you from the same chapter, but a different character's perspective. Today was supposed to be the first day of Diego Sandobar's apprenticeship, but it had been postponed due to something with the discontinueds. They'd hightailed it out of the pit and spent hours on Eden for some unknown reason. He'd asked, but no one would tell Diego. Made him feel like they didn't see him as a graduate, like they still thought he was a kid. Maybe he'd asked one of his moms about Eden when they got home in a few hours. They were both on the convoy board. One had been elected from the computing department, the fifth in her genetic line, and the other was the head of the communications, and the sixth in her line. So they knew about stuff. Unlike him. He'd been stuck in his quarters all day, looking over hydroponics data on flex sheets. One thin page flopped into his face, startling him awake. He'd sprawled out on the futon an hour ago, and his eyelids had gradually become heavier and heavier. The family tabby cat had curled up beside him, and he gently shooed her away. ICC. Yes, Diego? Can you turn on some music, something to keep me awake, please? A 22nd century percussion piece blared through the living space. The heavy bass timpani, coupled with the occasional chimes and cymbals, chased away his weariness. The cat didn't care for the noise at all and bolted for his parents' room. Satisfied, Diego refocused on his work. He ran one dark hand over his eyes, chasing away the rest of sleep, and sat up. Technically, his job was on Morgan, not Eden, but his focus was sustainability and balance, so part of his job took him to the garden ship. If a previously innocuous bacterium or fungus started eating away at the soy or other legumes, he'd have to engineer a way to keep it from destroying the entire stock. A prospect that, secretly, bored him to retirement. He wondered if it had been like this for all other iterations before his. He'd never met the previous clone in his line, as an accident had ended the man's life decades before retirement. That was why he'd been grown early, out of sync, causing a few other crew members to shuffle positions. Had all other Diego Santobars been unsatisfied with their work? He'd never told anyone. He didn't dare. They'd send him to the shrinks, run him through tests, maybe call him unfit for duty. How could anyone be unsatisfied with their job? It was in their blood, in their genes, in their very essence. If you were out of sync with your essence, what did that make you? A freak. A mistake. It could make you up for discontinuation, the ultimate shame. The high-pitched beeping of the door's keypad alerted him that someone was home. He checked the clock. Neither of his parents should be back for hours. But one of his moms came bustling through the door. Vega. Her ice-blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, and her thin frame vibrated as though she'd received a sudden shock. "Oh, good you are here," she said, as though she'd feared he might be elsewhere. She started to say more, but paused, her eyebrows knitting together. Interesting, music choice. ICC's pick. Helps me focus. Why are you back so early? Her mouth smiled sweetly, but her eyes betrayed tension. I wanted to... She was being weird, even by mom's standards. Vega was concerned that you might have been asked to clean up on Eden, said ICC. Why? Diego stood and put his work aside. What happened? She looked up at the ceiling, clearly annoyed with the computer. She didn't answer her son. Come on, Mom, no one will tell me what they're doing over there. With a huff, she brushed past him and made for the kitchenette. Since his growth spurt, he'd come to appreciate just how small she was. At 6'1", he could scoop up her 4'7" and pack her around like a child. It was strange remembering that she'd once given him piggyback rides. You don't want to know, she said. I wish I didn't. Now, Vega? ICC asked. Mortification crossed her face. No, not now! Did you do any coding today? She asked, her tone far too cheery to be sincere. A combination of worry and excitement swirled in his chest. This was why Diego thought that if he were to reveal his secret, his distaste for botany, to anyone, it would be his mom. She was ICC's caretaker and thought it would be nice if Diego shared her love of computers. And he did. So much so that he wished his genes had been brought on board for the AI. He wanted a job that wasn't his, and he knew that was wrong. No, he said, I have to finish these pages first. All right, I'll be in the back for a little while. Tell me when your madre gets in, will you? He wanted to ask her more about Eden, but kept quiet. Yeah, okay. With her brow furrowed and her face unusually pallid, she shut herself in the bedroom. He continued to go over the data with the music blaring, rushing through these last few sets, eager to have time at the terminal. Finished with the agonizing part of the day, he turned down the volume and went to the touchscreen, but stopped. Now that the living room was quieter, he could hear Vega talking in her bedroom to someone. To Margarita. But Madre wasn't home yet, so it had to be over the comms. Not especially weird, except, well, Mom's voice was up there, hitting a range she could rarely reach except when overly stressed. And Madre sounded disturbed. Forgetting his daily tech treat for the moment, Diego tiptoed over to his parents' door and pressed an ear to the metal. We promised not to interfere, but, said Madre, audibly nauseated. But this is too far, said Mom. The captain's called an emergency meeting, and the warden will be there, but I don't think it'll pass a vote, Vega. We signed a treaty and... Oh, give me a break. The board won't let this stand. They've got to be just as scared, Madre said. We have always been scared. That's the whole point. That's why they were discontinued in the first place. This is a bad sign, though. This is a breach of trust. This was freaking murder, Vega. Both women fell silent. Diego shut his eyes, concentrating. That might have been ICC in quiet mode. Now shuffling, blankets maybe, and footsteps? Oh, crap. He tried to throw himself away from the door, but couldn't beat his mom to the punch. With a whoosh, the door slid aside, revealing his crouched posture and guilty expression. Anger flared in Vega's eyes, though he could tell it wasn't really directed at him. Get to the monitor and practice your algorithms, she said warningly. Who was murdered? He asked, standing up straight. Consciously, he knew now was not the time to challenge her, but his subconscious screamed at him to push. He wasn't a kid. In less than a year, he'd be moving into his own singles quarters. His parents had to know that they didn't need to protect him. He could help them with... Mom, who was murdered? She reached out, taking him by the shoulders. Stiff tremors rocked her limbs. Her voice shook. Don't say anything to anyone, okay? This can't get out. Not until the board can deal with it. Gently, she turned him around and gave him a guided shove in the terminal's direction. Before he could once more demand inclusion, she stomped back into the bedroom and shut the door again. So that was a two-part reading from Noumenon, which was my 2017 debut novel. If you're in North America, it'll look like this. If you are in the UK and other English-speaking nations outside of North America, it looks like this. And if you speak German, it's called Die Reise and looks like this. Thank you so much for joining me for my first reading. I will be reading from all three books in the trilogy, so stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll be back for more in the future. Thanks.